Hello and welcome to the live event from the Northern Crime Syndicate. I am Adam Peacock, also known as AM Peacock, and I'll be hosting this event today with my fellow authors from the group. Thank you to all the attendees for taking part tonight. And just to say, there is a chat function at the side. You can chat in there with each other, with us generally. We will be limited in our response because obviously we'll be asking questions of each other and talking and whatnot. But if you do have a question for any of the authors on the panel, at the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A box. So if you want to click on there and type in your question, after about half an hour to sort of 45 minutes of talking, I'll then address the questions. So you might want to wait until we get towards the end of the first section so that you don't ask a question that I've potentially already asked. Or you can just put them in as you go along, that's fine. Okay. Well, without further ado, I will get the authors here to introduce themselves. It's my pleasure to be here hosting this, and I guess we'll start with you, Trevor, because you're next to me on my screen. So who are you and what do you do?
Hi everyone, I'm Trevor Wood, author of The Man on the Street, a pacey crime thriller set in the homeless community in Newcastle.
Okay, Chris?
Hi, I'm Chris McGeorge. I write twists on locked room mysteries. First one was Guess Who. Second one's Now You See Me. And the third one is Inside Out, which is now coming out on the 29th of October.
Brilliant. We'll go Rob Parker.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Rob Parker. I'm from the Northwest. I live in Warrington, which is halfway between Manchester and Liverpool. And I write the Ben Bracken thrillers and a couple of other standalone bits and bobs.
Judith?
Hi, I'm Judith O'Reilly. I've written 4 books, and my latest one is an action-adventure thriller called Curse for They, which is about AI. And very pleased to be here tonight.
And Robert?
Hi, I'm Robert Scragg. I write a series about my main characters, Detective Porter and Nick Stiles, good old-fashioned police procedural. Latest one, All That Is Buried, out in the last couple of months, centers around a missing girl and a family full of secrets.
Brilliant. So you'll have noticed, everybody, that we have 2 kind of Roberts here. So we when referring to Rob, we mean Rob Parker. His name's listed at the top, and we have Robert for Robert Scragg. So if you have any questions specifically for people as well, by the way, you can mention them by name and we'll know who to direct them to. Okay, and just give you a heads up there, you may have seen a cat in the background of my screen. I do apologise if he starts making noise. He's not the most quiet of animals. So if you do hear a screaming, it isn't somebody in my house, it is the animal. Okay, so let's get started. Right, so you've had your meltdown, and you've come to start your new project. Do you have a particular ritual or kind of process for this? What's the getting in front of the computer screen and getting it done kind of moment for you like? Do you have a shot of whiskey and crack on? Do you have a ritual? We'll start with you, Rob Parker.
I've got to be honest. I thought, I've been thinking about this a lot, in the notion that we all go about this a different way, and there's no, people will try and tell you that there is a gold standard way of going about writing a novel, and there just plain isn't one. There's just however you get those words on the page is how you do it. And I think I wait until an idea has got to a point where I'm like, right, I'm absolutely bursting to write this now, and I can't settle unless I get pen to paper. Sometimes as well, though, that's motivated a little bit by the help of a deadline, which means that, heck, that's coming quickly, I better crack on. But no, there's no special ritual at all. It's more just, right, let's do this now, go.
Yeah.
And the whiskey, Rob, obviously.
No, seriously, no.
Okay, whatever you say, mate. Whatever you say.
Well, speaking of whiskey and whiskey drinkers, Robert Scragg, do you have a particular ritual?
So the whiskey has played a part, but that tends to be when I finish a draft. And I don't know if that's just because I happen to have finished the draft on a day with a Y in it, and I've had a little nip at the end. But I've toasted each end with a whiskey. But in terms of getting started, it's similar to Rob. I get to the point where I've got an idea that I think is good enough. I need to know how it ends before I start it, and it's then a question of how long I can hold off. Once I've got the beginning and the end, I tend to have 1 or 2 lines per chapter planned out. I'll sit and go through. I have a 2-page synopsis, and then I love a good spreadsheet. So I've got a spreadsheet with all my chapters on, nice and order, kind of whose point of view it is, what day it happens on, and some notes about that chapter. It could be like, I don't know, something as simple as one line: 6 crime panelists sat on an event, one's brutally murdered during the event, that type of thing.
I know that when having, because obviously I'm an ardent fan of Joe Nesbo from the Scandi Noir books, and he talks about how he kind of has a synopsis for so many chapters in a row, so he kind of plans it that way. Seems to be some sort of like a similarity there, so you do have a bit of a blueprint for you to be able to follow. Yeah, definitely. For me, it feels, having not had that for the very first one, and I've kind of developed that as I've gone, it makes it feel more seamless, kind of moving from one chapter to the next. I've cut out those bits where I was previously sitting there thinking like, oh God, what am I going to do next? Yeah. Okay, Judith, how about you? How do you start a project? How do you approach that daunting task?
I was just thinking as you're talking, Lee Child starts on the same day, doesn't he, in September every day? And I think while I was listening to Robert, I think James Patterson does outlines of like 40 pages before he starts. I don't have a meltdown. I was quite intrigued at your sort of question that, after the meltdown, when you start.
Insight into my own psyche.
Oh, right. Okay, you have a meltdown. Okay, I'll have to diary that one then. I think about things very long and hard. And for me, the thinking is most of the work, really. I do a lot of reading of current affairs because I'm writing action adventure now. So I think you've got to sort of have a handle on, I don't write international stuff, but you've got to have a handle on this sort of geopolitics, and then you've got to know your way around what issues are going to be coming up, because you want to sort of be ahead of the curve. You want to be predicting things. So I do quite a lot of research into that kind of thing. And then the desire or the urge to write just gets too much. So I've got to sit down at that point.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, Chris?
Yeah, I think for me, sort of the very first thing I need is kind of the hook of the story, the kind of thing that, because we all read so much, and probably like everyone watching this reads so much as well, that you're not going to retain everything from every single book. So I think I want to find out something that maybe in 5 years' time, if you looked at one of my books, you wouldn't necessarily remember everything about it, but you would remember one specific thing. So for Guess, well, it could be a twist, it could be a location, it could be something. So something like Guess Who, I can't really say, but something for like Now You See Me, it was kind of the setting, and specifically the canal tunnel, where all the stuff takes place. And for Inside Out, it's more a setting as well. So after that, I can really sit down and start.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, and Trevor?
Pretty different, actually. I like to write a chapter. I like to write the first chapter. Might not be the first chapter at the end, but it's like flexing a muscle, I think. I like to start writing something and get a first chapter down and then go from there. But I'm not much of a planner, so yeah, unlike people like James Elroy writes thousands and thousands and thousands of words before he even starts. But I like a first chapter. So Man on the Street, I wrote the chapter that is set on the ship in the Falklands, because it's chronologically where the story starts. It ended up, I think it's chapter 3 in the finished novel. But it got me going, got me thinking about the character, got me thinking about the story. And then I kind of put it aside and then think about it a bit more.
I don't know if you found the same, Trevor, but I'd be interested actually. So I know some of yours does involve flashbacks to your main character's previous timeline. What I found best easier with my second book was to actually write that timeline in chronological order, like the whole. So not just that first one, and then kind of splice the two together afterwards. Did you do the same, or?
I didn't, but primarily that's because my flashbacks have quite big gaps in between them. So there's one when he's kind of 19, 20, and then the next one he's about 23, So there's big gaps, so they weren't continuous. So I didn't need to.
So
yeah,
the theme of this panel overall really is kind of the writing process, and to dig a bit deeply into that. So Trevor, I'll start with you on this kind of next question, because you did allude to it there in terms of, so when we write, we have kind of what's called plotters and pantsers. Plotters kind of makes sense there, the real planners, however that's done, people like Amit Dan with spreadsheets and whatnot and color-coded character profiles on the wall. We have pantsers, which I believe it's just the same as from the seat of your pants. You get an idea or something and you kind of go with it. And Judith alluded, I think Lee Child has that approach. I know that I do as a writer. And you kind of alluded to the fact that you don't believe you are a plotter. So what's that like for you? Which are you, and how does that kind of work?
I'm a total pantser. I literally do make it up as I go along. I mean, sometimes I have ideas of future chapters, future scenes, incidents that might happen, but I've no idea why they happen, where they're going to happen, and what's going on. In the Man on the Street, I had no idea who the main villain was until I got there, until I got to the end. I didn't have a clue. I didn't need to know, basically. But you can go back and retrofit after that. Once you've made your mind up what makes the most sense, you can go back and tweak things a bit. So
I was going to say, it's that editing process that becomes perhaps a bit more, I know certainly for myself as well, I found that not knowing and then getting to the end going, all right, that'll fit. You then have to go back and drop those red herrings in the right way earlier on, don't you?
I edit a lot.
You have to like your editing process, I guess.
Yeah, I do a lot of editing. I just kind of feel, I mean, there's two things. I kind of think if I don't know what's going to happen next, then I don't see how the reader can possibly know. And secondly, it feels more natural. It feels like, I mean, I don't write police procedurals like a couple of you guys, but basically it's the way the police, they don't know what's going to happen in the future. They kind of investigate the next thing that they have to investigate. And it seems to make sense to me to do that as a writer as well.
Yeah.
But I know, other people think differently.
Do you find any challenges with that approach?
No, I don't mind it. I don't mind it, but I know some people they just can't do it. I know most of my writer friends have got very hefty plans and they can't start until they've written them. So they write the whole book out. I think Lee Child is a bit of a role model, but I know he says that he's a storyteller and that if he wrote the story out as a plan, he's already told the story. So he doesn't want to tell that one. He wants to write something else. Yeah. And that makes sense to me.
So Robert, as somebody who, from your kind of first answer, I'm getting the impression that there is a level of planning for you. Would you class yourself as a plotter, and how does that kind of form for you?
Yeah, if I had to sit on one side of the fence, it would be plotter. I'm not as much of a plotter as some. I've heard you mentioned Joe Nesbo earlier on, and I went to see an event where he was appearing at, probably 2-3 years ago, and he alluded to a couple of his books where he plotted and researched for up to 6 months before he actually wrote a single full chapter. Now that extent would drive me absolutely batty. I just couldn't wait that long. And even I've seen some people who'll have like a big cork board up and it's post-it notes, color coded, all that kind of stuff. So I don't go to that degree. It probably from getting the idea and starting that chapter breakdown probably takes me 3-4 days. And that's alongside a day job as well. So it's kind of more like 3-4 evenings in terms of plotting it out. And I guess I'm kind of on the fence really, because I don't know everything that happens in that chapter. I just know where they are, and there might be like one big incident in there, but I don't know how they're going to necessarily arrive at it. And then similar to Trevor, I kind of make it up as I go along. It's more like I'm kind of stood in the corner of a room watching it unfold, making notes as it happens.
Yeah. Chris, having read your books, both of them, and certainly with Guess Who, the first one, I would be surprised if there wasn't a level of plotting going on there. But I do tell me if you are more of a pantser. But I kind of feel like how would you write that if not for plotting first?
That's weird because I'm a pantser.
Right? Oh wow!
I'm definitely a pantser.
Trick me then.
Yeah, I think that what you said more attributes how many drafts I had to do. Because there's so much, as you said, like retro going back and putting in everything. But yeah, for both my books so far and the one coming out, I've known the end. I always know the end before I start, but nothing in between. Nothing in between.
That is the same as me, Chris. Actually,
Yeah.
although
Yeah.
I didn't plan, I knew the last chapter and I knew the last line of the book
Yeah.
almost before I'd even started the book.
Yeah.
Gave me something to aim for, you know.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah.
So Judith, how about you? Where do you kind of sit on this?
Robert mentioned a cork board, which makes me worry that he's been in the house. Because yeah, I have a cork board, and I have, you know, postcards, and I do a 3-act structure, and so I want my midpoint, I want my, you know, I want my end of Act 1, my end of Act 3, and I just find it easier really to be able to, you know, the cliches sort of beat it out, and then I go back to it and I think about where I want sort of turning points to be, and I think about who I want them to meet where. And I quite like the mythological sort of structure where, you know, you have sort of characters falling into, maybe it's the action adventure sort of trope. I don't know about sort of Rob Parker, whether he does the same kind of thing, but you know, you want them to meet the lover at one point, you want them to meet the sort of, you know, holy fool type, etc. So yeah, I like to know where I'm going. That doesn't mean to say that I don't get to the end, and at that point I will have to feather stuff in, which is my favorite point in the entire writing process, when suddenly, you know, it all comes together. What I am going to do, I'm going to do it slightly different though this time round, because I'm going to try and write a little bit faster. So I'm going to try and plan even more, hammer it out even more, and see if that means that I can actually chew through more words sort of quicker. And also Robert mentioned a timeline. So at the end of Curse the Day, my editor wanted a timeline to check, you know, that things were indeed happening when they were supposed to happen. And very reluctantly I did one for the sake of the editor, and it made it so much easier. And I just thought I'd have saved myself so much time if I'd have created that timeline from the start. So I'm going to do that as well. I think that'll be tremendously boring, but I hope it saves time.
What if I was to say to you, Judith, that you're simply not allowed to plot in advance of the next novel and you must just go with your gut on it? How would that make you feel as a writer?
Well, I have written 2 memoirs where I didn't plot, obviously, because it was about my life. So maybe that's what sort of scarred me for life, really.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, Rob, how about you then? What's your take on this?
I feel like I'm still very much at a formative point in my writing career and the whole journey, or whatever you want to call it. So I'm still magpieing bits and bobs of other people's techniques, trying them out. And then, you know, so I love conversations like this, because I will go on and try it. You know, I've got a big corkboard behind the camera over there, and I'm looking at it thinking like, but actually as I'm looking at it, I can see a half attempt at a plan that I've abandoned. Because I absolutely, the joy in writing for me has always been that thrill of putting the words down, and when they come together, and those days where the words are like, much like this pint of Guinness here, flowing over the top. You know, we all have those days where they're flowing right over the top and you can't get them down quick enough, but we also have those days where, kind of like this one, it's almost empty and there's not much going on in there. And that's all part of it for me, and I love all of that kind of stuff. I have tried to plan, but I just got so bored doing that you know, I just wanted to sit and write. So I'll have an idea where I'm going, but it won't be written down anywhere, and I'll just sit and go for it. That's it. Just go and keep writing. And as long as the words are coming out, I'm not worried, because you can fix anything that's down on the page, but you can't fix something that hasn't been written yet. So get it out and then twiddle with it later.
Yeah, I think it's refreshing to hear a number of different approaches. I mean, obviously a lot of the attendees here, some will be readers, some writers, and some both. And I know that when I was starting out writing myself, when I used to go to panel events or see authors talk, it seemed that I just caught a lot of authors who were actually plotters. And I knew within me that that I wasn't going to be a plotter. I was much more of a pantser. But I felt like I couldn't write until I found somebody who had a level of success that did that approach, that took that approach. So I think it's great for anybody who is writing to hear that actually you can Frankenstein bits of both approaches, take one or the other, and it's really about what kind of works for you. So that's great to hear. So in terms of characters, and I'll start with you, Judith, here, mainly because I love your characters in your book, North, and I love the names. So you will have to tell where you come up with the names generally. So when it comes to your characters, do you start with like a profile properly drawn up in advance so that you know your character or characters, at least the main one, in advance? Or do you find there's a level of development through the writing that naturally changes that character and the sort of becomes something you hadn't really expected?
No, I mean, as you indicate, some writers know everything about their characters before they sit down. No, I'm not like that. I know what they want, and I know what they need, and I know if they've got some sort of ghost in the machine, if they're sort of carrying some kind of, wound, is the cliche. So I know those things. This time around, one character or two characters I paid quite a lot of attention to were two of my crucial villains, because in my first book, Killing State, I had the sort of the big baddie off the page for a lot of the time, which is something you can do. It's a legitimate thing to do, but I found it actually made it harder to sort of create that sense of, terror and fear and jeopardy when you sort of weren't seeing them in operation. You knew sort of logically that they were doing and responsible for all kinds of ne'er-do-well things. But this time I put them on the page. So I spent quite a lot of time working up the two of them. And I found that worked for me much better. Yeah, brilliant. Robert, so with your books, obviously you have the crime-fighting duo of Porter and Styles. So did you give much thought to, because we had a conversation, I'll not mention the author, but we had a conversation around a pretty well-known book recently, and you were saying that you find it quite difficult to differentiate between the characters in terms of their voice in the book. Yeah. How much thought did you have to give to planning that your two protagonists out together so that they were different enough to kind of complement each other on the page?
So if I'm being totally honest, when I did my first draft, not enough. And this goes back to before I'd found my agent, before I'd had their input. And I finished the first draft and I used a company called the Literary Consultancy to do a full manuscript edit. And that was one of the things they picked up on. And it hadn't really occurred to me. I think I was just so involved in let's just get it finished, that I hadn't taken a step back and considered that kind of thing. So that was one of the big things I had to revisit. And obviously when we're talking about words on the page as opposed to an audio book or a screen adaptation, you haven't got kind of accents necessarily and stuff like that to differentiate it. So I really had to go back and think long and hard about how to do that. And that was probably one of the harder things I had to go back and rework for that first draft.
Did Robert think about making, one of your characters a woman, to help with the differentiation or not?
To be honest, by the time I then got the agent interest, and that happened pretty quickly after I made those changes, and I hadn't considered at the time. It wasn't a conscious choice to think I need two men in this role. Maybe possibly I was subconsciously influenced by some of the other writers that were inspiring me at the time who had an all-male duo. Who knows? It wasn't a conscious choice. I've got a couple of standalones that I've written separately which aren't out yet. One of those has got a female lead. So, I have tried to mix it up and experiment with different characters, different voices. It was, I got a funny look off my wife when I finished that one, and I gave her the draft to read and said, "Well, you mind me telling me if I make a good woman?" And barring, literally, there was two things that she flagged, two particular passages of text, and she said, no, a woman wouldn't say that, a woman wouldn't think like that. But apart from that, actually, yeah, not too far off the mark, actually.
How attractive
you don't want to end up being an example on men who write women on Twitter, because that's quite a famous Twitter feed that I follow, and there's some great stuff on there from some very well-known authors.
Right, I'll have to look at that.
Avoid that, yeah, but give it a follow if you fancy a good laugh. They post some excerpts of different bits of writing on there, and it's quite funny. Trevor, for you then, because I read The Man in the Street recently. Well, it's only recently come out, so I wouldn't have had much of a choice there. And I loved the variety. So the difference in your characters, kind of the secondary characters in the book, sort of is it Gadge, his mates, Jimmy's mates. And I know that when I wrote Open Grave, I remember feeling like I could have a lot of fun with the secondary characters and the people around the protagonist.
Yeah.
Did you find that was the same for you, or
Yeah,
what was the
absolutely.
thinking behind that, sort of in the dynamic between Jimmy and the people around him?
It was a really conscious choice because, I mean, Jim is a veteran. He's homeless. He's got PTSD. He's not going to be a laugh a minute, obviously. No. So I wanted to surround him with people who might bounce off him a little bit more, and Gadge was one of those people. But I worked really hard on all the minor characters as well. I think it's quite important. I've got a probation officer I absolutely love writing. Every time I want to bring her in more often, but it wouldn't really fit the story. But I love it when I'm coming up to a chapter to write her, because she's a great character, very irreverent, real gobshite, actually. It's great. But I knew you were going to ask this, Adam, and I found some notes. I see that one of my fellow UEA course members, Caroline, is in the audience, and she'll remember this, but we did a masterclass with Mel McGrath. I don't know if you know her. Really good writer. But she was the only one who came in and actually decided to teach us. All the others just came in and had a chat. She came in and gave us exercises. And one of them was this thing where you had to write, your character is the kind of person who, and then you wrote a list of 5 or 6 things. And I normally hate that kind of stuff. Not my scene at all. But I found them, and I think they're really interesting. So on Dino, who's a young drug addict, he's the kind of person who never buys a metro ticket, which I really kind of like as a character note, kind of says a lot about him. And Carrie, the main female, was the kind of person who would vote for Jeremy Corbyn, but also the kind of person who circles the dots over the I in her name when she writes it down. So just little stuff like that kind of helps you build up who your
I want to go back and do that now. I like that.
Yeah, good fun. And the other thing we did was an exercise where you wrote down the 6 possessions they might take out of the house with them, which, given my guy was homeless, he's outside the house all the time, but it made me really think about what he would carry around with him. And I had a list which had a wind-up radio, a water bowl for his dog. I didn't even know he had a dog at the time. I suddenly went, oh God, he's got a dog. That's great. So just little things like that, I think, help you to build your character. I think they call
dog
it.
Is called Dog as well. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I haven't got notes for the dog.
Yeah, not even a name, just Dog.
Just Dog. Yeah.
I think that says a lot about the character as well. That he calls the dog Dog. I think that.
That was deliberate as well. Yeah, that was deliberate. It's like he couldn't even be asked to think of a name for his dog.
Yeah. So in terms of moving on to in terms of major challenges that you've faced during your writing, it may be your most recent project or a book that you've had along the way. Chris, what's kind of been, what major challenge or challenges have you sort of faced in your writing at times? Has it been a writer's block or something else?
I think actually linking in with the last question, it's probably writing women, I think, is a big thing. Especially in Inside Out, because it takes place in a high security women's prison. So 95% of the characters are female. And I'm not sure about everyone else, particularly the men on the panel, if they've been criticized about writing women before. I've had a few comments. I don't know, but yeah. So I really wanted to challenge myself for the new one, and just try and set myself up for the biggest failure possible. Probably let that Twitter account have content for about 2 months, and just give it a go. So I don't know if anyone else has any comments on that.
Anybody?
I think if you live in the Northeast, you're surrounded by strong women. You've got plenty of examples.
Yeah.
I wouldn't dare write a woman who's not a really strong character. I wouldn't get away with it. I live in I've got a wife and a daughter who would keep me right, and loads of friends who would keep me right as well. So yeah, just look around you, Chris. That's my advice.
Well, hopefully, I mean, my editor is a woman and she says it's okay. So hopefully it's okay.
I'm just conscious that that's 8 o'clock, and I know I'm hearing fireworks in the background and whatnot. So if people want to just take a moment, we'll clap for the NHS, and then we'll carry on with the panel as normal.
Yeah, great idea. Can you hear the saucepans outside?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Those thoughts are on outside, yeah.
As long as they're not setting off fire lanterns.
Fireworks.
The cat's inside, so he's all right. He's not that bothered. Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so yeah. So in terms of challenges, then, Rob, how about you? What have you faced down during your writing career?
I think all the stuff that I would say were challenges were all away from the page. So I've not had any writer's block so far. I've not had any, I've enjoyed every book I've written. I think it's more the behind the scenes stuff that I found really challenging, like agents and managing your own career where an agent is concerned as well. I spent ages trying to get an agent, and I eventually got an agent, and it was great. We had 4 great years working together, and there's no hard feelings or anything like that. But there came a point where it had to end, and there was like a 6-month period where I was frustrated. I think that's the right way to put it, and because I don't like combat and I don't like falling out. I don't like that any kind of confrontation, despite what you might think from the books that I write. I don't enjoy any of that at all. But I also have faith, because you have to have faith in yourself. You've got to back yourself in this game as well. So I also had faith in myself. So I made the difficult decision before Christmas to part ways with my agent. And since then, I thought, what should I do? I don't know what to do. And I decided to carry on going alone. And try and use this stupid grin to open doors that way, And since then, I've absolutely had a blast, and I feel very settled and in control of where I'm at the moment, and I know what it is I'm trying to achieve. And whether I'll go back in and get another agent, I don't know. Truly don't know. But it's been a revelation, though. Usually when you would have your conversations with a publisher, you'd have to do that through your agent, usually, wouldn't you? Whereas, and it would take weeks, for a conversation of any sort of weight to find a resolution. And now it's a question of, we can get it sorted in 20 minutes because there's no middle party to go through who have their own feelings on it. And this comes with the greatest respect to the agent who gave me my initial chance, who I have very fond feelings for.
So you're still with your publisher, but the agent's kind of no longer, So
yeah, that's it. And it's fine. And I've also signed with this news will come, but I've signed another deal with another publisher. And I was able to do all that all by myself. And I actually have a law degree locked away. And this was one of the only times I've ever had to use it when the contracts came through, because I knew my way around a contract and it was all right. I was like, I got it. You know what I mean? So it was fine. And no, I've enjoyed this.
It's interesting now that you've mentioned that you have a law degree. Coming on to the next question, you can be of use to me potentially, and I'll be in touch with you with something I'm writing at the minute. Yeah,
mate, I was only good with the chatty stuff. I was only good. Nothing on the paper. I won't.
No, you promised it.
Up here. All right.
So around research, what's so Judith, in terms of research, what's kind of your process and who do you have helping you? Because I know that your books are. I'm about to read the second one. I've read the first one. I can tell research has gone into it. So how does that come about for you?
Do I have people help with the research? Well, by trade, as it were, I'm a journalist. So I've worked for the Sunday Times and Channel 4 News and Newsnight. So, research is, one of my sort of, is in my skill set, basically. I do have help. I tend to have help on the sort of marketing, social media type side of things. With my first book, when initially I couldn't find a publisher, I brought it out myself. So I had various sort of, talented young people helping me do some of the sort of legwork that was required to do that. But research, no, you just read a shed load of stuff. You read books. You go onto the net. You go to the original source rather than just take the sort of short form or the news report or whatever, because you always get way more stuff from the actual organizations or from the academic reports. But as I say, it takes a lot of time. If you're going to make a living as a writer, I think you've got to be able to turn over the books at a reasonable speed, because they are a product. They are a creation and a labor of love, etc., but they're also a product, and you need to be able to fulfill demand.
Yeah. Trevor, how about you then? Because obviously it's a fantastic idea, one which when I tell people about the book, as I do very often, I think I wish I'd thought of that. I did write a short story from the perspective of a big issue seller years ago and won a competition in Writers Forum. Yeah, so I thought, I don't know why it didn't materialize into something else. The concept is fantastic, Trevor, and so I'm wondering, how did you? Because I know you do some volunteering work with people's kitchens and stuff. So
I did.
What was the research like for you, and how did you do that for your group?
I did loads. I mean, I think if you're going to write about a homeless guy and about a PTSD sufferer, you've got to get it right. You owe them a duty to get it right. So I did a ton. Yeah, I went down to people's kitchens, spent quite a bit of time down there, and ended up volunteering there once a week. Sadly, it's been closed for the last 3 weeks, which is a shame. On the PTSD side, the main reference for me, there's a fantastic book by a guy called Jimmy Johnson called The Veteran's Survival Guide. And he's a former army veteran who served 2 tours in Northern Ireland, but saw some hideous things and has had terrible PTSD. So badly that he's ended up being found guilty of murder twice. Went to prison once, came out, murdered somebody else, and has been in prison ever since, really. But then wrote this amazing book about how you could help people with PTSD, how you can help people get over it, how to recognize it, full of fantastic information, which was a huge resource for me, really. And I was really delighted. In fact, I can see Emily's in the audience today, but I got an email a few weeks ago from a friend of his who's been reading bits of my book out to him over the phone in prison. And I've just sent him a copy yesterday, so I hope he gets it soon. But that was invaluable, frankly. And it is an amazing story. I'd recommend it to anybody who's interested in the effects of PTSD. I mean, it's kind of odd that you have to talk about ex-servicemen and the homeless, because if you just talk about homeless guys who used to be bus conductors or whatever, nobody really cares. As soon as you point out that a lot of them are ex-servicemen, suddenly people are engaged in it. I'm not sure whether that's the way we should be thinking, but that's the way it is, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, tons, Adam, basically.
Okay. And then Robert, so for you, did you do much research around putting body parts in freezers?
See,
That's a reference to Robert's book, by the way, not just.
I've got an unjust rep, thanks to Fiona Sharp and Durham Branch of Waterstone. She thinks I do have a bit of a freezer fetish because they appear in 1 and 2. Absolutely unfounded. But no, I kind of approached the research thing almost back to front, and this is going to make it sound like I'm more of a pantser than a plotter. But I prefer, once I start writing, to just get it done. And if I need to stop and do some research, if it's something I can't find in less than 5 minutes, I'll just leave myself a little reminder to say, you're going to have to go back here and read up on this and go back and add that in. So, for example, for book 1, that included things like I needed to know how much, if someone had 30 grand in the bank back in 1984, how much would it be worth in kind of today's money? How long could that have stayed in a bank account for while direct debits came out? When did direct debits get invented? That kind of stuff. So it was the finer detail, and I thought, yeah, I need to get that part right. But I'll come back to that later on. And with the police procedural side of things, I definitely did it back to front. So I wrote it, and I was lucky enough to, or I'm lucky enough to have a friend whose wife works for the police in the civilian role, and she put me in touch with a serving DI, and he foolishly agreed to answer my list of questions. I don't think he realised how long the list was. Yeah. It was like one of those cartoon moments, where they open the pad and it just goes.
Can I ask Robert and Adam, did either of you ever think about joining the police?
I nearly did twice, as it happens. Once when I came out of uni and I was going to join through the graduate scheme, and I got put off by it was my mum's cousin, I think it was. It was a member of the family who was in the police at the time, and he said, "Oh yeah, fantastic, fantastic. Everyone your manager's going to hate you for a while, mind, because you'll be the young lad coming in managing people with 20 years experience." And then the second time was actually only about 2 years ago, 18 months, 2 years ago, when I wasn't sure about the security of my current day job. And I was considering other options, and I looked at the police fast track scheme, direct entry, and you can go in as a DI or as a superintendent if you've got external experience. So I went as far as going and sitting on a webinar, getting the application forms, and then I got the job that I've currently got as my day job. So I just let it drop, but very, very close, yeah.
What about you, Adam?
No.
In a word.
I think while I was teaching in FE, I probably thought about all manner of jobs to do other than that. Not because I didn't love teaching, but because it was a very tough industry from 2010 onwards. So it may have crossed my mind, but in reality, no. If it was exciting as like on the television, and then maybe being an actor as a detective, that would be more sort of, rather than doing the real stuff. Because even though I write some quite grim torture scenes and whatnot, I'm a bit squeamish, really. So sorry, Rob, are you gonna say something?
I was gonna just add. I did as well. About 5 years ago. No, not quite. Yeah, 5 years ago. I think I did the same thing as Robert. It was the fast track inspector program, they called it. Yeah. And so I did all, and it ended up in this. I ended up in this loop of online exams, and I know I aced a load of them, but then a maths exam came up, and I'm terrible at maths. And the question, I remember it now, was like, so if a car is valued in Japanese yen at this in 1985, what is it worth now in dollars, with adjusting inflation and exchange rate? And I just bombed. So I failed the maths exam and couldn't participate any further in the recruitment process.
So, well, there's more and more similarities between us apart from the name, because not only have we both nearly applied for the police, but I did law at uni as well.
Did you? See,
yeah.
This is
we both box.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Have we ever seen
an
the
email
same
coming
room,
across
guys?
it?
Same time.
I was going to say the beard's detachable. I just like it's Velcro.
I can't grow a beard as good as that. That's the problem.
Right. I'm going to ask one more quick question. I just want a very quick answer from each of you, and we are going to move on to questions. We've had a couple emailed, and there's some in the Q&A box. If you do have a question for anybody on the panel or everybody, please do type it in the Q&A box now, and I will come to it in a minute or so. So my kind of final question until we move on to that section, and by the way, we have this thing where the host of the panel at the end reads an excerpt from one of their books, just so the participants here who are listening, it doesn't come across as strange. I will be reading an opening chapter from one of my books at the end. Haven't decided which one yet. So the final question is, if you could undertake a joint writing project, and the answer can't be, I couldn't possibly do that, you're going to have to choose, with any living author, who would you pick to do that with? So we'll start with Chris McGeorge. Who would you like to write a book with, if you had to?
This is the one I haven't decided. I think that he's kind of gone that way already. It would have to be Stephen King for me.
Oh man, I'm going to have to cross mine out now, Chris.
I'm glad I'm not asking myself the question, because I would have said Stephen King as well.
Well, me, Trevor, and Stephen King can do one all together.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
You're like me, you just want to sell a shed load of books.
Yeah.
Rob Parker, how about you?
Well, very honestly, the answer and the name is someone in this group. It's Judith. Because I think Michael North and Ben Bracken could properly tear it up. So yeah.
Well, Judith, no pressure on you then. Who would you?
Sorry, I didn't think about that.
Rob Parker. And if Rob Parker wasn't available, then Lee Child or David Baldacci or James Patterson.
Right. James Patterson has history for writing with other people.
Chasing the money again, Judith, I think. Chasing the money.
Right, Robert, how about you?
I think going for James Patterson would be like saying I want Tom Cruise to play my lead character, really.
Fair enough.
I think if I had to be anyone, probably if you put me on the spot, and I really hate trying to pick one author of all those books I've read over the last how many years, but probably the one that I find myself recommending more than any other is it's an American author called Greg Iles. And he's written a number of standalones in the series. There was one series in particular set in Natchez in Mississippi. It just the final 3 books in that literally blew my mind how good they were. And if I could be even a tenth as good as any of those, I would die a happy author.
Brilliant. Trevor, are we sticking with Stephen King or are you going elsewhere?
I don't know. I do have a reserve. I'll probably go there. I mean, Stephen King was a choice, A, for the money, but B, because his On Writing book is fantastic. I don't know if you've all read it, but I don't read many books about writing, but that's the best one I've read. I think. I'll go Dennis Lehane.
Great choice, yeah.
Not the Shutter Island Dennis Lehane, because I thought that was shite, frankly.
What?
I'm not having that. We'll talk about this later.
You think that's never going to happen now, then?
No.
We're definitely going to have to tag Dennis Lehane into any sharing we do.
Any of the Patrick Kenzie, Angie Gennaro books, that Dennis Lehane.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll move on to the questions then. So I'll start with what we have in the Q&A box, and then I'll go up to the emails. So, I'm not having that, Caroline. I'm not having Shutter Island being talked down. I enjoyed it. Right. Anne Briggs says, "Do you ever write a chapter that you love, but then realise you have to dump it in the final novel?" We will put that. Go on, Trevor. You're waving. Let's see.
Yeah, I definitely did. I did that a lot in the first book. And there was one I really liked, but it just didn't fit in the flow of the story. But it's in book 2. I just used it later, just changed the context a little bit. In fact, I was working on it today because I'm editing at the moment. And it's a great chapter, but it just wasn't right for book 1.
Yeah.
So yeah, all the time.
Excellent. Alex Hawley has asked, here's a question for all of you. As Robert mentioned, audiobooks and accents, have you ever, after listening to your audiobooks, felt like changing things? And if so, why? And just to point out, my first book, Open Grave, was made into an audiobook, and I've listened to some of it, but I can't listen to it because if I heard something I wanted to edit, I couldn't live with myself at this point because it's out there. And I know, but just from personal kind of experience, some people that have listened to that audiobook, I know some people are struggle with the accent because it is very regional to the Northeast. But I wanted that, so I have absolutely no problem with it. So how about that? Anything where you felt like changing things after listening to an audiobook? Has anybody done that? Should we start with you, Judith?
I think you've got to just let it go, actually. I had a Radio 4 book of the week for my first book, which was obviously not an audio book, but, a sort of, radio, short radio audio book. And that was quite difficult because that was effectively listening to my story in someone else's voice. And so she did emphasize things I wouldn't have emphasized, and she did read it in a particular way that I didn't necessarily agree with all of it, but you just had to. Yeah, it's fine. It's a different thing, I think. Radio, audio, TV, film. When it comes, you just got to let it go and let them get on with it. Different creation,
Yeah. Okay, because I'm conscious of how many questions we have, I'll move through them. James Langan has asked, what is your favourite book? Was there a book that inspired you to write? We'll put that to Chris.
The book that inspired me to write is And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. It's just a classic, and it just blew me away, really.
You should just drop the mic at that point, Chris.
Yeah. My favourite book, apart from that one, probably The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I think that's the only book that I think is perfect that I've read. Any others would be probably something by Sarah Lotz. Because I love her.
We've had a comment in the chat from Simon who said that On Writing is great, and I would echo that. I actually have it here at the side where, because I write at this desk, Stephen King's On Writing Hopefully he'll give me a shout out because I've done it for him now. I did. It's kind of part autobiography, part How to Write, by Stephen King. And I read that because it was recommended to me years ago before I kind of properly started writing, and I found it invaluable, amazing. So I would echo that. We have, if you didn't write crime, what other genre would you write in? And I'm going to put that one to Robert Scragg.
So I've actually got a few non-crimey bits on the go at the moment, and the pair of them actually sit squarely in the kids section. So one's a kids picture book that my brother is currently illustrating before we send that off on submission, and the other one's a mid-grade, so kind of aimed at 12, 13, 14-year-olds.
Well, yeah. Okay, James has asked, have you ever considered self-publishing? Is anybody who here has self-published? Judith, I know that you, yeah. Trevor, then we'll go for you. Somebody who hasn't self-published, but maybe has thought about it. I don't know. Trevor, what do you think on that?
No, I didn't consider it at all. Two main reasons. I think, first of all, I needed validation. I needed somebody else to tell me it was good enough as a first-time novelist, if you like. But the second reason really was because I've co-written about a dozen plays, and as it got harder and harder to find places to get them on, ended up producing one of them and spent a year auditioning, booking theatres, arranging tours, which basically is self-publishing, but in a theatre, if you like. And I wasn't doing any writing, and I hated not writing. And if you self-publish, you've really got to put some time in selling your book. You'd probably spend more time in PR than you do in writing, and I didn't want to do that. Okay,
then because there's a second part of that question, in terms of pros and cons versus the conventional route, Rob Parker, because obviously you have self-published, you've kind of worked with an agent and with a publisher without an agent. What do you feel are the pros of kind of taking that self-publishing route for you?
Self-publishing gave me a lot of confidence, well, for a start, I was amazed how easy you could do it. So the first Ben Bracken book, which is a wanted man now, was called The Baby and the Brandy when it came out Christmas 2013, when I literally typed the end and then uploaded it to the Kindle store. And it was that quick. I couldn't believe it. But people seemed to like it, and that gave me a lot of confidence for the battles I was and hurdles to come with trying to get an agent, because I believed in the people, what readers were saying about it, that they enjoyed it, that they'd like to read more, that kind of stuff. And it gave me that resilience later on. In terms of cons, obviously, as Trevor said, it's hard work doing all that, and there's so much of it out there as well, so much self-published stuff, that it's very hard to stand out amongst everything else. But I would always say to people starting out, if you can't, if you're spending days and days of your life with rejections everywhere, you can do I'd recommend it to anybody, because you can get feedback immediately on what's happening. People were buying, it came out just before Christmas, but people were buying it like before Christmas as well, and telling me what they liked and what they didn't like. Usually it was because I hadn't done a spell checker on it, and there was a load of errors in it. But yeah, definitely. And it can give you that ammunition for the next stage, because no publisher will ignore numbers.
Yeah. Fantastic. Okay. So Becca Wood, who I'm sure has no relation to Trevor, is asked, I say with a wry smile, Trevor, if a movie was made of your book, who would be the dream actor for Jimmy?
I know who she'd like it to be, but it's not him. Well, the Man on the Street has been optioned by the people who made Bodyguard and Line of Duty. So I think I can fairly safely leave them to find the right actor. But if you back me into a corner, I've only decided this recently because I kept saying Tom Hardy, just because my wife would like that to happen, but that's not going to happen either. I quite like Stephen Graham. You know Stephen Graham?
Yeah.
From This Is England and stuff like that. And he was a villain in The Last Line of Duty, I think. Well, he wasn't actually. They tried to paint him as a villain, but he was a cop undercover. He's a terrific actor. I mean, whether he can do a Geordie accent, I don't know.
Yeah, hands off, mate. Hands off, Trevor.
Thanks. Yeah, I tell you what, it's a great shout. I haven't read the book, now you mentioned that. I think, yeah, absolutely. He can do anything right. That actor. He's absolutely fantastic. James has asked, for authors that set books locally, did you ever consider choosing London or USA for greater chance of commercial success? Robert Scragg, I know that you obviously set your book, there is a setting in London, which you've mentioned before, is kind of, you were down there at the time and it made sense to do that. What's your kind of feeling on that, kind of setting it somewhere where you feel there might be more commercial success?
I think for me, if you're trying to pick a location purely because you think it's going to sell more, I think that's not, for me, I don't think that would flow through into it being the best book it can be. I think you need to pick the right location for the story and for the characters. And if all of that clicks nicely for me, then it becomes more commercial. So I wouldn't pick a location purely because I think it would sell more copies.
Yeah. Lisa's asked, mentioning knowing the start and finish before you begin. How much time do you spend polishing that first sentence of the book, and how do you know when it's just right? That is a great question. And speaking from personal experience, I'll tell you, just before you submit those opening 3 chapters to any agent or publisher, you probably rewrite that first sentence quite a few times, or at least read it anyway. So Chris, how about you on that first sentence? What's your thoughts there?
It's actually really, I really kind of rewrite the first sentence. And definitely in Guess Who, I think my first, shall I read my first sentence? Oh no, it's not that good, don't worry. But definitely in Now
Chris, you've got to read it now, man, read it. Oh.
I was just, I thought it was better than this. It's, the school is quiet by the time I get back.
Okay.
And unfortunately, and Now You See Me, I did write a really, really good first sentence, and then the prologue got cut. So, yeah, but Inside Out's first sentence is really good.
We don't believe you now.
No, move on to someone else, move on.
Yeah. Howard Linsky, the world famous Howard Linsky, who we all know and love, has asked, I would like to ask the panel, and we'll go with Robert, I think, on this one, because I believe you're a Newcastle fan.
I am.
If you had to murder Mike Ashley in a book, how would you do it? He says he's asking for a friend.
So I think obviously it needs to be a crime you can get away with, and bearing in mind there'd probably be a couple of 100,000 suspects, it wouldn't be too hard. But I think I would probably go for literary death by 1,000 paper cuts using pages of a Howard Linsky book. and then I think I would leave a copy of Alice Taylor's Missing on his chest.
Adam, can I jump in on that one? Just Howard knows this, but I literally was editing yesterday, and one of my editor's notes was, who is the fat Cockney bastard, and was he still around in 2012? So very relevant.
Rob, you'll have a bit of editing to do before we put this on YouTube, just so you know. Danny's asked, what's Chris's favourite locked room mystery?
Well, my favourite locked room mysteries are kind of ones that are twists on it. So Agatha Christie again, Murder on the Orient Express, where there's so many, it's that train and there's those suspects. The one that sticks with me the most is not actually a book, it's an episode of Jonathan Creek that I saw when I was like 10 years old, and it scared the hell out of me and I couldn't sleep. It was set, I haven't found it. It's on Netflix, I think. So I should look through, but it's set in a library and it's about a statue that comes to life and kills people. But obviously it doesn't really, it's all fake, but that's the one that sticks with me most.
Yeah, wow. So we'll move on to the email questions. I've had a couple come across. So Leslie's asked, and I'll put this to you, Judith, how, and that's if at all, did your writing process change once you were published?
Well, so my first book was based on a blog that started as a diary, an online diary. So initially I was just doing it therapeutically for myself, although I was writing it on the internet as opposed to in a book, with a key. So I must have known that people might find it. But I wrote that, without a lot of self-consciousness. It felt very natural for me because of being a journalist. I was basically telling stories about my own life, and it was helping me to sort of talk about my life. So that's a sort of different, and it's a different genre, obviously, memoir to action adventure. So I probably overthink things terribly now when I'm sort of genre writing.
Yeah. Fantastic. So James has asked, in terms of like your writing routine and creative process, do you treat it like a job, sort of like a strict 9 to 5 of writing? And how do you fit it in around work and family commitments? So let's have a look. Rob Parker, I know you have 8 or 9 children, and
it does sound like it tonight.
so what's that like for you? Are you a 9 to 5 person? Do you work elsewhere alongside? How do you manage it with your family?
It's funny. Discipline is the big one. I've been very lucky enough to write full time for a few years now, and it's definitely a question of I can't be precious about when I get the chance to write ever. So if there's 5 minutes, like I'm picking up one of the kids from, I don't know, swimming practice or whatever, there's if there's 5 minutes in the car, those 5 minutes will be used to write, and I make sure I do 2,000 words every day, because if I break it down like that, working 5 days a week, 9 to 5, you'll end up with 10K a week, and you can probably, looking at it, you can do sort of like, I know that when I want to turn a novel round, I'll need 10 weeks about, and then there we go, and then there's a workable first draft by that point. Some days I'll have to work late to make sure those 2K words are done, but I find it's a manageable number that doesn't scare me too much. You know what I mean? Like if I said, right, I've got to sit down and write 5K. One day I sat and wrote 5K words and my head was like a blancmange by the end. I just couldn't, I couldn't make head nor tail. I couldn't even speak. And I knew the word by the end. I knew I'd gone too far when the last sentence I wrote was something like, a human being walked in. It was just, I'd lost it, completely lost it by then. So yeah, discipline is the one.
Fantastic. Okay, so final question from John Park asked, and I'll put this one to you, Trevor. So if any of the panel had their books optioned for television or film, and you have. By the way, that's a fantastic light your head's appearing in.
I know, I don't even... I'd go and put the light on, but I'd have to walk all the way to the back of the room.
Well, that's great. A floating head like Bohemian Rhapsody.
I was just going to say, I'm half expecting Freddie Mercury to pop up on the set.
Would you like to adapt it in terms of screenplay and whatnot yourself, or leave it to those? I was going to say professionals, but you are professionals. So would you like to leave it to somebody else, or adapt it yourself to the screenplay?
It is desperately tempting to throw your hat in the ring, but you'd have to kill off half your story. TV adaptation of anything, no matter how long it is going to lose half the book. And I couldn't do that. I like it too much. I like the characters too much. I wouldn't want to lose any of them. So the adaptation would be about 25 hours long, and that wouldn't be any good for anybody. So no, I'm very happy to leave it to somebody else to make those decisions. Just give me the check. I'm out of here.
Drinks are on you then. Right, that's all for the questions. I'm going to, as the host gets to, I think I'll read from the second book. So the first book in my series, the DCI Jack Lambert series, is Open Grave. And the latest one is Grave Intent. I am writing the third, waiting for that to be done. If I had the discipline that Rob Parker did, perhaps I would be doing it a little bit quicker than I am right now.
Don't use me as a benchmark for anything, mate.
But I'll be emailing you about lawyer stuff soon, so don't worry about that. So it's a very short chapter. I'll read the opening, just so people get a kind of an idea, a flavour of what my books are about. And then we'll have a brief chat just before we go at the end. So here we go. This is Grave Intent, chapter 1. His breaths came in sharp, panicked gasps as he ran from the farmhouse. The rain was pounding down now, making it hard for him to say exactly where he was going. Stinging his face, as if scolding him for being out in such weather. His feet slipped in the muddy earth, nearly causing him to fall. He glanced over his shoulder, his eyes wide and fearful. He had to keep running. He just had to. He hadn't expected anyone to be home. The wheat field had provided good cover, and he'd been told that the farmer wouldn't be there. Wait until well after dark, approach from the east, and stay low, they'd told him. 3 scarecrows and you're there. He hadn't banked on a light turning on as he opened the door, nor the shrieking of rusted hinges announcing his presence. Such was his shock that, at first, he hadn't even seen the man with the shotgun sitting in the corner of the room. That was when the growling had started. The dog had lunged at him first, before the man had stood and cocked his gun. He turned in sheer terror, feeling the warm trickle of blood moving down his leg as the Alsatian's jaws locked in place. He'd gouged at the animal's eyes and managed to wriggle free. He'd slammed the door behind him and slipped on the wooden patio, smashing his chin against the damp wood. And so he'd ran. Cursing his luck, he moaned and carried on, dragging his injured leg away from the house in the pouring rain. He couldn't see him, but he knew that the man was not far behind. The barking grew in volume. Each time his right foot made contact with the ground, his injured leg screamed at him. Come on, he urged himself, fishing out his mobile with shaky fingers. Rain smeared across the phone screen as he typed in the wrong pin. He swore as the dog clamped its jaws over his leg, once again, dropping the device as he lashed out into the night. The dog whimpered and hurtled back towards the confines of the house. He continued past the first scarecrow as a shot rang up around him. The sound of screeching birds evacuating their nests rose above the noise of the retreating dog's barks. Allowing himself a stifled sob, he carried on past the second scarecrow. I'm coming for you, boy, the farmer's gruff voice bellowed from behind him. Why had he agreed to the job? He didn't know what was worse, having to go back to them without it, or being chased through a field by a gun-toting maniac. By the time the second shot came, he'd made his decision. His adrenaline was up, blood pounding through his ears as he passed the third scarecrow, which was sat askew on its frame. He could almost see the end of the field now, as a set of headlights moved across his vision. Help, he shouted. The lights disappeared from view, leaving him alone with the man and the gun. Ugh! The field rose in a steady incline, and he could feel his calves burning as he pushed onwards. The stitch that had been throbbing away at his side now burst through, sending shooting pains up his body. He could feel the injured leg lagging and knew he was slowing down. Every step proved more difficult than the last, his feet sliding in the sludge of the churned-up field. Keep going, he told himself. Only one more scarecrow. Suddenly, the atmosphere thickened. So confused was he that he barely registered the absence of sound around him. There'd only been 3, hadn't there? He passed all of them on his way to the farmhouse. Could he have been wrong? He stood some 15 feet away from it, its black cloak swirling around in the biting wind. Its head faced the ground, much like the others, with a pointed hat covering the upper features of its face. He shivered, aware of how cold he now felt. He could no longer hear the man, only the sound of heavy rain and his own thudding heart. He turned and looked back towards the house, noting that the light had now gone out. He was alone in a field of 4 scarecrows when there should have only been 3. He snapped his head back around as the sound of a twig breaking cut through the silence. Sweat began to trickle down his back. He edged forward. Hello? The scarecrow hung before him, unmoved by his presence. Reaching out, he took hold of the thick black cloak and gazed up into its misshapen features. He exhaled a sigh of relief. It wasn't alive. Thank God. But he was sure there had only been 3 scarecrows, not 4. How could... Dread crawled up through his stomach as he realized. He'd been so distracted that he hadn't fully registered what he'd seen. The 3rd scarecrow hadn't looked right, had it? It was askew on its frame. No, that wasn't quite right. What was it? It hadn't been on a frame. A blow to the head caused him to fall to the ground. The impact left the side of his face numb as he looked up and saw the 3rd scarecrow staring down at him. It smiled a crooked smile, a thick, angry scar noticeable across its left cheek. He made to scream but was paralyzed by fear. He tried to crawl away, but his wounded leg wouldn't let him. Slowly, the scarecrow man stepped forward, heavy boots slapping into the wet earth. The grin spread wider over his face as he brought a gloved finger up to his mouth. Quiet now. When the pitchfork broke through his skin, he found himself unable to comply. So, thank you very much, Rob. Yeah, so that's Graven 10, second in the DCI Jack Lambert series. It's a police procedural which is set up in Newcastle, in and around. Just for me to thank everybody for attending today. We've loved having you all here, and the questions have been great. We are looking to put some content out on a regular basis. Please let us know generally and feedback to us what you think of that and what you think of these panels generally. Probably every couple of weeks or so, we'll look to do something similar, and we'll have different themes for each one. And a different member of the panel will host, and we'll kind of rotate that. We are the Northern Crime Syndicate, so please do like us on Facebook, and you can find us on Twitter as well. All the individual authors will be kind of linked on those pages, so you can follow us as well if you're interested. So that's all from me, really, and just to thank the other authors from the group as well. It's been a real pleasure tonight. I've really enjoyed it. So stay safe, everyone, as they say, and see you next time.
Bye.
Right.
Everyone,
Thank
bye-bye.
you.
Bye now.